Thank you all for joining me tonight for a brand new presentation. This one's on green partnerships, unlocking the secrets of companion planting or just companion planting. A lot of us probably already do this. Some of you may be scratching your head and saying, what is companion planting? And I'll kind of go into a little bit about what it is. We'll talk about some things that go together, some things that don't go together plant-wise, and why. Um, I know we've all seen the infographics that say you should plant these together, don't plant these together. But this is kind of a deep dive into the whys and the hows of that. So as always, I've got you guys muted. And if you have questions as I'm going through, feel free to drop those in the chat box. I will get to them at the end. And at the end of the presentation, there will be a page where you have my email address and additional QR codes on where you can get to our classes and where I record these and where they're stored on a YouTube channel. So you can go watch them anytime. And if you would like a copy of the slide deck, feel free to email me at the email address on the last slide, and I'll be happy to share that. So let me let the last couple people in and let's go. All right. So companion planting. This is when um, you're planting different crops near each other and they're maybe benefiting one another. One might be benefiting from it, the other might not be getting anything out of it. But either way, they're beneficial or not beneficial. So obviously, some crops or plants can't be planted next to one another for different reasons, and we'll go over some of those reasons. But when we have limited space, which a lot of people do, and they're planting in raised beds or they're planting in pots or planters or something like that. But even in ground, it's helpful to know what you can put next to each other that will either benefit or trying to stay away from something that's going to harm. So kind of the history of companion planting. Probably the one that a lot of people think about, that's the Three Sisters version. So you have corn, beans, and squash, and those all are planted together right close. The corn is something that's tall, and it gives the beans and part of the squash something to grow on. This was used over 10,000 years ago by the Native Americans and is still used today. I use that sometimes in my own garden if I'm running short on space because I want to try a bunch of different things that I haven't. But it's a very handy kind of way to plant when you don't have a lot of space. So you can get corn, which gives you a lot of nitrogen, or sorry, it's a heavy nitrogen user. You've got beans that actually help produce and fix nitrogen in the soil, and then squash, which, yeah, it's kind of in between. It's a semi-heavy feeder, but then you've got something for that to crawl up. Allelopathy, 2,000 years ago, the Greeks and the Romans knew that. And though we don't really have bay trees here, um, they used grapevines. We knew that grapevines didn't grow on the bay trees. And so there was something going on there. Of course, it took a little while longer for folks to kind of understand the whys out of it. But, now we know a little bit more. And we also knew, and your probably grandparents or great grandparents knew, that walnut trees didn't have much growing underneath them, black walnuts. And that was because of allelopathy. That means that they produced something, and we'll talk a little bit about that later, that helped the prevent plants from growing under there for competition for nutrients and water. Nitrogen fixers, 1,000 years ago plus, mosquito ferns were grown with rice, and that helped fix nitrogen and shade some of those plants so that you didn't have other weeds that were competing, and they got a bigger crop out of that. And then organic farming in the 1920s, people started realizing that When you were organic farming, it was better. You didn't have to use chemicals, pesticides, and other fertilizers, but that some plants worked better with other plants and you got a bigger crop. So there was maybe not the scientific knowledge or basis there, but there was the knowledge that was passed down. All right, hang on a second. Oops. Some benefits of companion planting. There's a lot of them. Enhanced pollination. When you have maybe some marigolds that are planted there to kind of help repel pests that are next to maybe your bean plants, like you see in the picture up there. Your beans have flowers, and so do your marigolds, and so you'll attract more pollinators. You may get the benefit of warding off pests because of essential oils or things that repel those pests, and luring pests away from valuable crops. Trap crops is what we call those. And then, of course, enhanced or improved nutrient availability, and that most famous one would be legumes and nitrogen fixation. So benefits of companion planting. You're going to get higher vegetable yields. You could get some shade for heat sensitive plants, for instance, cucumbers, which don't like the hot Georgia sun. So finding ways or things that can shade over the top of them to provide them with a little bit of shade is a good thing. And they can also act as a trellis for vining crops. Corn is a good one for that. And they also help in preventing soil erosion. So mechanisms for pollinator plants. So having really pretty, colorful splashes. That's why we really love pollinator gardens. You could call it a perennial garden. You can have some annuals in there, whatever you want to call it. But the end goal here is, especially if you're growing vegetables or fruits, is that you want to try to get those pollinators into your garden. So we get calls all the time from folks who maybe live in a newer subdivision. They are one of those folks that really loves to garden, and so they have maybe some raised beds, some container gardens, but their neighbors don't. And so they call us and they say, I've lived here for 1, 2, or 3 years, and I just don't have any pollinators. I don't have bees. I don't have butterflies. What's going on? And the thing is they're literally an oasis in a desert. Most developers and builders don't put pollinating plants in as foundation plantings when they build a house. It's just plain old, boring foundation plantings that don't have much value to pollinators. So when you get somebody that moves in and says, I want to have a pollinator garden, and so they put one in, those pollinators have to find that garden. And that can be challenging because, literally it's an oasis surrounded by a desert. So the more pollinating plants that you can provide, the easier it will be for those pollinators to find you and to remember where you are. They do have a memory. So that helps lure them in. Having your house or your yard, trees, bushes, perennials, annuals, have something blooming all year round, that's going to help retain pollinators and help new ones find you. Plants with high quality pollen, a lot of times that is a native. Sometimes it's not. It might be an endemic plant, something that's adapted well to the climate here. And that can include peas, beans, lupines, and different types of clover, red clovers, white clovers. Those are also nitrogen fixers. And you can have plants like borage that provide nectar that's used as a cover crop. It's an exceptional sugary energy source, and that can actually lure pollinators in. And then, of course, as I just mentioned, native plants, which are obviously good pollinator plants. Some of them aren't that exciting to look at, but they do provide a very valuable service in that they provide food for the native pollinators that are here. So mechanisms for improved pest management to reduce pesticide usage. We're always looking to do that, always. I don't think there's anything in here about IPM or integrated pest management, but that's kind of something that in extension, we just espouse that. That is, we should know how to manage our landscape, whether that be vegetables or fruits or ornamentals or whatever that we're growing, or a variety of them, and how we should be able to have a threshold on damage that we'll tolerate. And for some people, that's going to be a really low threshold because maybe the HOA is on their back and they have to have a beautiful, perfect looking yard. But for other people, they might have a little bit of a messy yard, and that's okay because they're servicing the pollinators and the natives. They've got their native plants out there, and it looks wild and it looks, unkempt. But to them, it's very beautiful because it's servicing the pollinators. So somewhere in there is a happy medium for whatever your house and your situation is. But ultimately, it's planting a variety of native trees, shrubs, and wildflowers. That's going to help the pollinators. If you're in a situation where you have an HOA and you don't have a ton of options, you can do some interplanting, meaning you can pick some additional plants that do have a benefit and plant them in between the foundation plantings that you have there. Sometimes that can fly beneath the radar, and that's perfectly fine. Or you put them in the backyard where the HOA is fine with what you're doing. And that is going to be your goal for attracting both pollinators and predator insects that can take care of some of those pests you might be dealing with. So some of the predator bugs, like lacewings, and I'll have pictures of those, hoverflies, tachinid flies, parasitic wasps, those are going to be predators on a lot of the bad bugs, the caterpillars, the things like that that are going to munch on your plants. And those are all good. So being able to have some types of plants that attract those is a good thing. Flowering herbs like dill and parsley, among a few others, those are very attractive to predatory wasps. Mountain mint, it's part of the mint family. Mountain mint can be a smidge invasive, but honestly, the pollinators absolutely love it. And you will be covered in wasps and flies. I know people are like, wasps, flies. I didn't know those are pollinators. Yes, they are. In fact, if you're interested in being part of the pollinator census in August, please reach out to me. I would love to get you some information to do that. And will be doing I think it's in mid or early August, right before that. We'll be doing a pollinator presentation so that you can learn a little bit more about pollinators and all the different ones that are out there and what they like. So pollinator plants are going to that produce a lot of nectar, and those would be like borage and Alyssum, bee balms, salvias, lavenders, cosmos, yarrow, a lot of those there. And pollen, unfortunately, yes, goldenrod is in there, and some of you think you're allergic to that. In actuality, it's really ragweed. That's a problem, but regardless of that and your allergy situation, uh, those are all very valuable plants to the insects that we really rely on for pollination. So, those are, some of those are going to have cultivars, named cultivars. Some of those are just the native plant, and they're not super showy. So I encourage you to look into having a mixture of both. That way you can have that real pretty landscape, but you're also servicing the pollinators. So again, improve pest management. So you want to kind of disrupt that pest's host plant. So most bugs are going to rely on some type of a host plant. Either that's something that they overwinter in, maybe that's something that they need their young to feed on. And so you need to have the education, the background to know if you've got a problem with something, where's that bug living? Where is it reproducing? Easy to find these days, let me tell you. Or you can just give us a call or an email and at Extension, and we are happy to help you identify that insect and then also figure out how do we control that so that going forward we don't have problems. So, a lot of times there's pheromones involved, and there are chemicals that those plants will exude. So there's a lot that's going on kind of a basic chemical scale. I know I talk about when I'm talking about organic pest control or nutrient deficiencies and treating that, I talk about chemistry. I try not to go do a deep dive, but obviously in the gardening world or the entomological world, there's a lot of chemistry. So just know you don't need to know necessarily what it is. Just know that there are some chemical signals that plants will put out, also insects, pheromones, and also visual images. There's nectar guides that show up under UV light and other things that will attract in both beneficial and pest insects. So having companion plants beside a host plant that releases volatile compounds, think essential oils, that kind of stuff, can sometimes help mask that smell. And so those pests don't find the plant that they're looking for, that host plant. So there's some small, strong smelling herbs, alliums, part of the onion garlic family. I mean, most of us don't want to kiss somebody who's been eating garlic, so I guess you can probably figure out really quickly why. African marigolds, they're going to produce some compounds that come out of the root system that can be absorbed by neighboring plants that actually change the odor profile. So if you plant those things next to some of these host plants that and again, you can look those up or give us a call. We can help you figure out what it is. And that'll change the odor profile. So the bad bugs won't be able to find them. Companion plants can actually camouflage again, or uh, physically block the odor. And then flying pests, if they can't figure out what plant it is, they're using up energy, and there's not a lot of energy there. I mean, bugs have to forage. It's not like they get to go to the bug grocery store for their food. So they got to forage, they got to have a food source. And if they don't have one nearby, and they can't find their host plant, they're going to move out of the area. So those are things that we look at with regards to integrated pest management. You're outsmarting the pests. You're trying to figure out what they need in their biology and all of that, and you're trying to outsmart them so that they go somewhere else. So trap crops, I've mentioned those. That's going to attract the pest away from the target crop. A really good example is sunflowers and tomatoes and leaf-footed bugs. So leaf-footed bugs are usually about end of June, July, when it's really hot, and you're looking forward to getting some tomatoes, and then suddenly they're everywhere. And these guys have piercing, sucking mouth parts, and they will inject this foul-smelling um, stuff, saliva, I guess, into the tomato plant. You can eat it; it's not going to hurt you, but it makes there's an off taste to them. They're really annoying and they're very plentiful. So you have to know, how do you disrupt their life cycle? Well, one of the ways you can do that is they actually will overwinter their eggs, and some of the adults will overwinter in the top couple inches of soil. So if you're out there and you had a problem last year when it's really, really cold out, go knock the soil around and disrupt the soil and get all of those eggs to the surface, where then they'll come in contact with the freezing weather and they likely won't survive. But if you don't get around to doing that, you can plant some trap crops. So you could put some sunflowers in a corner of your garden far away from your tomatoes. And leaf-footed bugs actually like sunflowers. They're very attracted to them. So they will move to the sunflowers, and you will have a greatly reduced number on your tomato plants. Um, let's see, companion plant roots. Again, I mentioned the putting soil or chemicals into the soil. So nasturtiums, they're going to excrete a compound from the root system, and that's going to deter codling moths and fruit trees when the tree absorbs that in its own root system. So and nasturtiums will also do that. So if you plant it in a raised bed. So a lot of times if you have attractants for, trying to think of a good crop that you have nasturtiums growing in. Um, Sorry, I can't think of anything off the top of my head. But nasturtiums are also edible, but you can also grow them, interplanting them with other things in your garden, and they will help mask some of the odor of that yummy plant that pest is looking for, and also some of these exudants from the roots that will be taken up by the adjacent plant. So plants that can produce VOCs, volatile organic chemicals or compounds, those will help deter pests from feeding on the crops that you want. So again, mention the African and the French marigold roots. Those can help repel nematodes. And again, without going to the chemicals, I don't have to say the name of it, but there it is if you really want. Um, so you can also see that they can also help prevent eggs from hatching. That's a good thing. Onions, of course, the allium in the allium family, they've got a lot of VOCs, and so those can help deter carrot flies and flea beetles in tomatoes. So if you plant them next to each other, that will help repel the bad guys. And marigolds, of course, are going to produce limonene, which can help protect from whiteflies. Mustards, they can help suppress fungal pathogens in the soil. So if you have a problem with some blights in your tomatoes, you could consider planting some mustard greens in there. And then carrots, again, are going to produce volatile compounds, and that can help deter onion flies. So cover crops, this can help with nutrient availability, and you can help build up some organic matter. I think it was 2 talks ago, I talked about cover crops and how they can improve your crop quality, and how if you have really poor soil, sometimes that can really help improve your soil and your productivity in your garden. So sometimes people will add, you can see you've got a raised bed below and you've got a cover crop in there. And so you just go in there and you chop that up and you add that back into the soil, and that becomes a good organic basis for your garden. You can also build up mycorrhizal populations, and so what that is, for those that don't know, it is a fungus that kind of lives in a symbiosis with the root system of the plant. It extends that root system. So extending that root system out, you have the extra couple inches or however long that ends up being, all those other little roots in there that from the fungus, and it adds new nutrients and water capabilities for that plant to uptake. And you can buy that as an inoculant and add it into the soil if you have a pot or a raised bed. It's readily available on the commercial market. And maybe you've got really poor soil, so you have some deep-rooted plants, and those are going to bring up some of the minerals and stuff into the shallower parts. So sometimes they call it the radish method, where you can plant radishes and they grow really uh, deep, fairly deep in there. You just let them stay in and they'll rot and add those nutrients back to the soil, but up at a shallow level. So you improve the soil quality. You have nitrogen fixers like your legumes, and that's going to take atmospheric nitrogen and it works its magic, and then it'll actually put that nitrogen down into the soil, so that if you have a heavy feeder like corn, which uses a lot of nitrogen, that's why you use crop rotation. So you can put a legume like a bean or something in there, and then the next year you'll put corn or something that's a heavy nitrogen feeder in there. It works really well. And then, of course, the root compounds that can change soil pH, and that can make nutrients more available to plants. Most plants prefer to be like 6.2 to 6.8 on the pH scale. But sometimes you have, for whatever reason, your soil is more acidic or it's more basic, and blueberries have the ability to do this a little bit. But the compounds, the nutrients, and everything that they need tend to be more bioavailable to that plant in that narrow range, at 6.2 to 6.8 or 7. So if you're outside of that, some plants do have the ability to actually alter that pH and either make it a little more acidic or make it a little more basic, so that they can take advantage of the nutrients that are in the soil. So, ways to suppress weeds. So, sometimes plants chemically inhibit the growth of other plants. This is called allelopathy. And I think we all probably know about walnut trees. I mentioned that first thing, and you can see some black walnuts down there. And that's why nothing grows underneath the trees. They're just bare down there. So, rye crop cover crops, and it's got two phytotoxic substance, and that can inhibit germination and seedling growth. So sometimes people will use that if you don't want weeds and other things like that to start growing, maybe when the ground is fallow. So sometimes farmers will use that if you have a really large area and you need that field to be fallow for a period of time. They'll put a rye cover crop down so that they don't have a lot of noxious weeds that grow in there. And then, of course, the black walnut, and that's called jugalone, and that's what inhibits the growth of weeds and anything else that you want to put underneath there. So again, chemical compounds, and then of course, cover crops like vining plants and things like that. That's just a physical one where it's going to block the sun so that the weeds don't get the sun and the conditions they need to grow. So that's one reason why we recommend mulch, because that kind of helps block the sun and everything. But you can also use plants for that. So ways to get a higher vegetable yield. Well, bringing in beneficial insects and using some of those methods that I talked about to make deter pests. So that's going to bring in the good guys to help pollinate and protect, and you'll get bigger crops out of that. As I'd mentioned, sometimes if you're stuck in a little oasis in the middle of a desert, and you have a pollinating garden and nobody else does, I'm a big fan of education and, go to your HOA board. Do you have a newsletter? Maybe it would be fun if you could teach a class on pollinators and pollinating insects and how you too can make your yard beautiful and attract in the bugs, the good bugs. So think about that, whether you're a master gardener or not. Um, but you can also enhance, of course, soil fertility with nitrogen fixing plants, legumes. That's the big one that usually is the easiest to do. Deep rooting plants. Um, that ends up with helping with the soil compaction. We've got a lot of heavy clay soil around here. So when you can break up that compaction naturally without having to till it and disrupt the soil biome, that's a plus all around, because there's stuff that grows in soil. Fungal, you've got the mycorrhizal fungus, which is a good one in there, but you've got decomposers and other stuff, and a lot of these guys, they kind of set up shop in that soil biome, and everything does way better if you don't mess around with it. So tilling is not necessarily a good thing, but if you can certainly grow things in there that enhance the soil, and in this case, that's what we're talking about. Um, so you've got protection. So tall plants like corn and sunflowers, things like that, can produce a shade for plants that maybe don't do so well in the hot southern sun. They also might provide some wind protection. So sometimes, you can get windburn if you've got a big open area, a big open field or something like that, and you just have a big wind. That we don't get a lot of wind down here, but when you have a big open area, you certainly get too much sun and you can get that wind. So that can help with protect some of those shorter plants that need a little bit of protection. Vining plants like cucumbers, squash, and sweet potatoes. Think back to the Three Sisters method. So, these tall plants could help shade out and suppress some of the weeds that you could have underneath. And then, of course, act as a living mulch, and they can help protect with soil moisture and keep things kind of cooler in the summertime. If you ever doubt me, go find a nice viney plant like sweet potatoes or cucumbers or something like that that has a really nice cover on it. And go, if you're out there and you're standing there like, wow, it's hot, stick your hand underneath that canopy and see it's definitely several degrees cooler. So erosion control. If you've got a lot of slope on your property, and kind of depending on where you are in Georgia, you might have a lot of slope, or you might be blessed with a fairly flat property, but guaranteed you probably have a little bit of slope someplace. It doesn't take much. Once you get one of these big gully washers that comes through that gives us, 2 or 3 inches in 30 minutes or 40 minutes, you're going to lose that top layer of soil. So having something on that ground to protect from those rain droplets is going to help keep that soil on your property. Later this summer, we're going to have an advanced training for master gardeners that's going to talk about stormwater, rain gardens, and all of that stuff, and how you can do a lot better job about keeping it on your own property. No one wants to lose soil. So you want to make sure you can keep that on your property so that it's not then in the detention pond or in the stormwater drain or, you know, one of the streams that flows by out next to the road that you turn in on to get to your neighborhood. You want to keep all of that on your property. So having something with a nice dense canopy to help buffer some of those raindrops so that you don't lose that soil is a good thing. And again, plant roots, they're going to vary in the depth. It really depends. We don't have a whole lot of topsoil here. So what we do have, we want to keep. And that means that it's very valuable to have roots that are going to anchor that down. We have a lot of shallow rooted stuff just simply because we don't have a lot of topsoil. So again, just making sure that you've got something growing in there to help prevent erosion is a good thing. So good companion plants as we move into the, you're probably like, come on, Lisa, move it along. I want to know what some of these plants are. All right, we're getting there. So here's some good scientific evidence. Remember, extension is all about scientific evidence. We're unbiased and we present scientific evidence. So here's some options for you. So marigolds, again, those roots produce biochemicals that are going to help prevent those root knot nematode eggs from hatching. So there's a compound in there that prevents that. So that's good. That's a pesticide. Alyssum, so that's going to attract small pollinators and like green lacewings that eat aphids. So if you got a big aphid problem in your garden, plant some alyssum and you'll get those green lacewings and they'll eat the heck out of your aphids. Sunflowers, again, leaf-footed bugs. That's a good attractant. They're also going to attract ladybugs or lady beetles, the good kind, not the Asian kind. We don't like those. They're stinky and they bite. But they're going to help provide shade so that it's not too hot wherever they are. Onions help protect against borers and cutworms, help deter flea beetles on cabbage, and deter carrot flies. So that's good. Cosmos, we all love the orange ones. They readily reseed in your gardens. And then, of course, you'll have the other ones like the purples and the whites and the pinks. Those will attract parasitic wasps and hoverflies. And then radishes, those are going to help repel squash bugs, and they can be a trap crop for flea beetles. And then beets, those leaves are going to have a really high concentration of magnesium. So this is, again, this goes back to the cover crop presentation I talked about, where you have a chop and drop kind of thing that you do where you grow, in this case, beets, and you take the top off, throw it back in the garden, chop that up with whatever tool you want to chop that up with, and then just let it work its way back into the soil. So that magnesium is going to help, produce a nutrient in your soil or put a nutrient back in your soil. So good companion plants, again, good scientific evidence. So nasturtiums, they lure caterpillars away from cabbages and Brussels sprouts and broccolis. They're going to excrete chemicals into the soil, which might be taken up by fruit trees, and that deters the codling moths, which can help your trees. We don't really have problems with those around here, but in other parts of the country, that's a good thing. They're going to help repel cucumber beetles and deter aphids and squash bugs. And of course, garlic, that odor is going to repel onion flies and Japanese beetles. Just as an aside, sometimes people will buy those Japanese beetle traps, the pheromone traps. Actually, you're kind of attracting them. They're used as a way to tell if you have them. It's going to attract the males. So they're not going to do anything about the females. It's just attracting the males. And it's just as a way to see if you have them. So you probably already know you have them because they've done damage to your plant. So really don't put those out or go sneak over to your neighbor's house, put it out over there. No, I'm just kidding. Don't do that. Your neighbor will be really mad. And mint, so that is a kind of a volatile compound or an essential oil. That smell is going to deter aphids and ants and flea beetles. But as an aside on that one, mint can be highly invasive. I don't care if it's just regular mint or chocolate mint. Don't don't plant it in the ground. It will gallop away. So if you're going to have it, put it in a raised bed or put it in a pot, something that can contain it so it doesn't get away. So dill, that's going to attract ladybugs and that'll eat aphids and spider mites. And then it can also attract parasitic wasps that can help control cabbage worms. So if you've got a really big problem with tomato hornworms, plant some dill nearby. That'll bring in your parasitic wasps and then they'll go find those tomato hornworms and they'll lay eggs on them. So if you happen to come across one and it's got all these little white bumps on it, leave it alone. Don't pick it because that's the next generation of those little parasitic wasps. And so next year you'll have even more in the area. So not only are they a pollinator, but they're helping to control those tomato hornworms. Now, of course, I'm always a fan because you've got some really cool looking moths. They're really huge. They look like the hummingbird moths that you see around. So I just plant extras. I plant extra tomato plants, knowing that I'll probably have some. Borage, that's going to attract pollinator bees and parasitic wasps. It's kind of a boring little plant. I mean, it's the bottom left there with a little bit of a blue flower, but it does a fantastic job both as a cover crop and as a pollinator plant. And then basil, that's a good repellent for thrips. Again, it's got that essential oil. It's going to deter moths that lay eggs for the tomato hornworm. So, also attracting bees and improving pollination. So, and that's after it bolts because you really don't want it to bolt. But if it's late summer and it's hot and you're just done and you don't want to go to the garden anymore, but you really don't want to go out there and have to take control and try to get rid of these pests, just let your basil bolt and it'll help attract pollinating insects in, and then you'll get some of those um, benefits from that. All right, how to identify, how to use companion plants in your garden. So identifying specific pests. That's kind of the basis of IPM or integrated pest management. You really need to know what you're looking at and what you're dealing with. You can't just go pick a pesticide and spray it out there and expect it's going to kill whatever it is that's bothering your plants because the way we look at it, we need to know what we're dealing with, whether it is a bug or whether it's a weed or whatever it is. We've got to know because some bugs are not affected by certain chemicals, and we always look at the active chemical. And some weeds are not, they're just not affected by certain chemicals. So we need to know what it is. So first and foremost, we've got to identify whatever the pest is we're dealing with. And then we can figure out what companion plants are available, if any, that can help with that. So some may attract in predators if it's a bug, a bad bug. Um, some may repel or mask the scent of the host plant, as I mentioned before. So knowing what you're dealing with and then doing a little bit of research so you know, are there any options here is a good thing. You want to have a diverse use of or a mix of plants, different heights, odors, colors, things like that. So it may look like you have a riotous color and garden itself, but it may be one of the more productive ones in your neighborhood because you've got a little bit of everything and it's all working together very well. So this is going to be, if you do that, those pests may have a hard time finding their host plant because you've got some things repelling them and masking odors, and it may look very beautiful and all of that, but it's actually very functional too. And then interplanting strong smelling herbs, as I mentioned before, using those volatile essential oil compounds to kind of mask the host's odor. So we all love the smell of basil. I mean, I love a good caprese salad. And part of that is the really strong odor of that basil. And I love that smell. Some people don't love it as much, or cilantro. Some people don't like tasting that. Did you know that if you like cilantro and you like the taste of it, you're actually in the minority? Most everybody tastes it and they're like, oh, that's soap. Um, that's the majority of people. I didn't know that. I love cilantro. I eat the heck out of it. But yeah, a lot of people think it tastes like soap, and that's actually the majority of people. They don't like it. But be careful when using plants with allelopathic properties because you know, obvious reasons, kind of depending on what the compound is and all of that. Um, there are some weeds that also use that particular property: quackgrass, nutsedge, ragweed. Some of them are very difficult to control. Nutsedge, once you get that in your lawn, you're almost better off just going out and pulling it because there really aren't very many chemicals that will control it. So just be aware that there are a lot of beneficial plants, but there are also a lot of weeds that are allelopathic. And then rotating crops with nitrogen fixing bacteria. So again, legumes are nitrogen fixers, so they'll put nitrogen into the soil. And then if you do a crop rotation with something that's a heavy feeder like corn, that will have more nitrogen in in the soil next year. So that's less fertilizer that you have to put down. All right, now we're going to move on. You like my plant tinder? Yeah. AI. I love AI art. Anyway, plant tinder. Who knew? So let's figure out which plants work and which don't. So here's a companion planting guide. Now, this, of course, is not the end all and be all. This is just kind of a good and handy way to see what works together, what you can plant in the same bed, and what you really can't plant in the same bed. So here's basil, and that's what it looks like. And the good, you can plant all sorts of things. So asparagus, broccoli, chives, collards, cucumbers, fennel, marigolds, okra, oregano, peppers, and tomatoes. The bad, and you'll find as we go through here that there are some in here that make repeated performances. Fennel, for instance, and we'll talk about why. Rue, sage, and Swiss chard. So basil, it's going to help repel flies and mosquitoes because of those essential oils. It can, and if I don't have valid scientific evidence as to why, and it's just kind of hearsay, I'll put may down there. But may enhance the flavor of tomatoes and peppers if grown next to them. Rue and fennel release allelopathic chemicals, and that can inhibit the growth, not just of basil, but all sorts of plants. So, like I said, you'll find some of these show up under the bad column pretty often. Sage, it just prefers drier conditions than basil. Basil prefers to have a decent, consistent moisture, where sage is more drought tolerant. I guess you want to call it that. Thyme can be kind of invasive and will grow faster, so it can compete and outcompete basil for nutrients and space. And then Swiss chard, I just kind of threw that one in there. That's different temperature and soil requirements. It prefers a little bit cooler soil. So, these two don't go together very well. Bush beans or pole beans, but bush beans. So the good: beets, any brassicas, carrots, celery, corn, cucumbers, eggplant, lettuce, peas, potatoes, and radishes, rosemary, sage, spinach, strawberries, sunflowers, and Swiss chard. Most things. The bad things: chives, fennel, garlic, leeks, onions, shallots. So a lot of allium plants. So beets are beans, sorry, too many B words, are rich in nitrogen. They're crop, basically it's a nitrogen fixer, and you don't want to harvest them when wet. So they go together with just about anything. There really aren't too many plants that don't do well. The ones that you see under the bad, some of those volatile compounds, they just don't go well together. They don't grow well. Also, you might have most of them are going to be like beans or summer or warm weather crop. Some onions and shallots are going to be like spring or fall crops, so they kind of overlap only just on either end. But generally, try to plant them away from one another. Beets. So again, the good: bush beans, any type of brassica, cucumbers, garlics, lettuce, marjorams, mints, onions, potatoes, radishes, Swiss chard. This is a cool weather kind of crop. So you're like, well, what about tomatoes and squash and all of those? Well, that's a warm weather crop. So you're really not going to be planting them at the same time. Pole beans, fennel, mustard greens, tomatoes, and turnips. So these leaves, again, as I mentioned, they can be a good cover crop. You want to chop and drop. So pull the tops off or chop them off and leave them in the garden and allow them to work their way back into the soil. That's gonna, and the roots will help break up compacted soil. So if you have an area that you want to start as a garden and you really don't want to disrupt the soil biome too much, you can distribute beet seed. You can do that with a lot of different root vegetables. And what they'll do is they'll grow into that soil and they'll break it up and they'll improve the structure. And then beets really don't compete heavily for nutrients. So sometimes they're good to have as a companion plant right next to each other to maybe something that's a heavy feeder because there'll be more nutrients available. Carrots, so good, just about anything. Aren't too many bad things that you can see there. The bads, celery, dills, parsnips, strawberries, turnips. Carrots are kind of an earlier spring thing or a fall crop. So there's not overlap on some stuff. But tomatoes kind of state that they can enhance carrot flavor. Again, may enhance. I don't know. Let me know if you find that's the case. They're supposed to release compounds that improve the taste of nearby carrots. So it tastes carrotier. Beans can produce growth because they fix that nitrogen in the soil, so you get more carrot tops. Some people like to eat those. You add them into soups, and that can make your carrots grow faster and be healthier. Chives supposedly make carrots sweeter, and they also help repel pests. So, cucumbers, again, there's a lot of stuff that's fine to plant next to it. You see there, these are a summer crop. The bad aromatic herbs, potatoes, late potatoes, rue, sage, and Swiss chard. So marigolds and nasturtiums can help protect cucumbers because of their strong scent. So, my mom always told me plant the marigolds around the borders of your plants to help repel those pests, like those beetles and thrips. And you don't want to plant those cucumbers next to or near potatoes because there are some diseases that overlap and they can spread them to one another. So just don't put them next to each other. If you want to grow them on opposite ends of your garden. And dill may improve cucumber flavor. Again, that's something that I haven't really been able to find much scientific proof on, but it may be the case. So some gardeners swear that it does make it. But if it does, let me know. Eggplants, so again, a fair number of things. This is a summer crop. There aren't very many things that are bad that they don't get along with. They're going to provide shade. You can see there's a huge variety of different types of eggplants, but they can offer good shade to shorter, smaller, heat-sensitive crops like spinach. So if you've got spinach that you planted in the spring or in the fall, and you want it to last a little longer, interplant with some eggplants. Those grow fairly tall, and you might get a little bit of extra life out of your spinach because it doesn't have the hot sun shining down on it. Enhancing flavor. So the nightshade family, tomatoes and peppers may improve each other's flavors. Just note that you may end up spreading some diseases just because they're all in the same family. Fennel, that's going to release that allelopathic chemical, as I mentioned. So you're going to see the fennel on a lot of these bad lists. That doesn't make it bad. It just means it doesn't play well with its neighbors. And brassicas are heavy feeders. So your broccolis and your Brussels sprouts and your cabbages and things, they're heavy feeders. So you probably aren't going to have a lot of overlap. Those are cool season crops, but you may end up having some in the spring and then putting your eggplants in. Um, you know, Overlap for a little while is okay, but you don't want them together for a long period of time because they'll stunt the growth. Lettuce. So again, a cool season crop. It plays well with all of that stuff. Now, if you're dealing with not much space, like you have one raised bed and a community garden, and that's what you have, or you just have some containers and a very small space in your backyard, it gets along pretty well. So if you planted in the fall or winter and you still have lettuce because it's been a mild spring, but you want to go ahead and start planting in some other stuff, you can do that. That's okay. Just plant other plants, your spring, summer plants around your lettuces. And as it starts to get warmer, your lettuces will get a little bit more brash in taste and they'll start to bolt. That's when it's time to pull them out. But know that you can plant them next to other stuff and they're generally not going to be a big deal. You can also use these guys as a cover crop and living mulch. So if you're done with them, just like with the beets, you can chop and drop them and that'll add nutrients back to your soil. They work well with tall plants. You can put these guys as an understory plant, and those tall plants will help shade. So again, you can get a little bit more time out of them and maybe some extra harvests by doing that. And the brassicas, which sometimes don't play well with others because they use a lot of nutrients, do have a good relationship with lettuce. Um, there's different levels of root systems, so they're actually pulling nutrients from different levels of the soil. So it works. Onions, again, these guys play pretty decently, but there's some bads, asparagus, peas, and sage. Again, onions are going to release those volatile organic compounds. They're stinky. Um, Again, kiss somebody and find out. But the strong set's gonna will deter garden pests like aphids and rust flies and all that. So you can actually plant them around the border of your garden, kind of like you would with marigolds, and use that to your advantage. So sometimes, and this is again a May, gardeners say that they improve the taste of nearby crops like tomatoes and peppers. I don't know. Why don't you grow it and let me know? But they don't compete as heavily for nutrients as the brassicas, the cabbages, broccolis, and such. And they will help keep the pests away. So good things. Parsley, usually this is a buy-in. Oh, I didn't change the picture. It's supposed to be parsley. Sorry. Something about copying pages and adding the info. The information's all there, but that is not parsley. So the good, again, it plays fairly well with just about everything that you see here. And there are a few bad players it doesn't get along with very well: celery, aromatic herbs, and potatoes. So they're going to parsley and celery have very similar nutrient needs, so they're going to be competing for the same nutrients, which is why you don't want to plant them together. So you'll get stunted growth in both. Some aromatic herbs like mint are again going to release those allelopathic chemicals, so they can stunt because of that. And it has a fairly delicate root system. So if you plant it too near an aggressive grower like a potato, it can really overcrowd and reduce the yields for that. And then again, celery and parsley can attract similar pests. So if you've got both of them in there, you may get more pests than really what you were hoping for. And then you'll be looking for something else that's going to repel them. I did get the picture here. Peas. So they play fairly well with everything that you see here. There are some bads that they don't get along with: chives, garlic, herbs, leeks, onions, potatoes, and shallots. So peas are in the legume family. They're nitrogen fixers, and they're going to pull nitrogen from the air and convert it into for the benefit of the nearby plants. Plants use nitrogen to grow new green growth, so everything really needs nitrogen. If you don't want to have to go out and buy it, then the easy way to do it is to put a plant in there that's going to fix it for you. But also alliums, again, those are your garlic and your chives and your onions. Will release some of those allelopathic compounds, and that can actually inhibit the growth of peas. Some things aren't really bothered by them. Some are more sensitive. Peas are one of those. So then, of course, if they're not growing, they're not going to produce any crops for you, and they're not going to fix much nitrogen. So certain plants like potatoes, they're going to attract pests and other things. So you may end up with more pests in your peas, and you don't get as much stuff as you wanted. Peppers. So a warm weather crop plays well with a whole bunch of stuff. Doesn't do as well with beans, your brassicas, and fennel. Fennel is just, nobody gets along with fennel. Fennel is that annoying kid that everybody does not like. But is still, you can put it over there in the corner of the garden. So some gardeners think that putting peppers near tomatoes and basil can improve their taste. I don't know. I've never noticed that, but not to say that that doesn't actually happen. But again, peppers, you know, attract brassicas like cabbage and broccoli are going to attract pests that also target peppers. So if you're going to have them, don't put them next to each other. If one end gets it, then at least you get your peppers, or, if the peppers get it, then the brassicas are, at the other end. And again, this is an overlap thing. So the brassicas are typically fall, winter, into spring, and then your peppers are going to be summer, but there might be some overlap at the beginning unless you rip everything out from the winter. But some people like to just let it ride and get what they can from their winter stuff until it's too warm. So if that's you, just make sure to separate them. And fennel is going to release allelopathic chemicals into the soil, and that can, affect the growth of the peppers. So again, fennel is not a bad thing. It just needs to be off by itself. Potatoes, they do well with, basil, beans, cilantro, a lot of vegetables and herbs and things like that. More bads, so asparagus, brassicas, cucumbers, fennel, pumpkins, sunflowers, all of that. Um, so potatoes mostly is just a competition for nutrients, and that's going to be at about the same level, root level. So that's why they're competing. They're a heavier feeder. Fennel, sunflowers, and walnuts, again, those all release some type of allelopathic chemical that can inhibit the growth. And um, pumpkins can shade out potatoes. They have much bigger leaves than potatoes do, so those big leaves can shade out the other potato, the leaves of the potato. And tomatoes and potatoes share each other's diseases, the Solanaceae family. So don't put them next to each other. So if you've got potatoes in bags, stick them somewhere, away from it, along the fence or something like that, away from your tomatoes. Radishes, they play well with beans, beets, all of that stuff, and not so good with the Brussels sprouts, cabbages, cauliflowers, that kind of stuff. So the brassicas are heavy feeders, and they're going to compete with for nutrients, and that'll stunt your radishes growth. So you won't have nice little radishes. You'll have little skinny radishes. And since it's a root crop and it grows underground, sometimes you can end up with too much competition. So if you've got turnips and radishes nearby, they can't get very big. They're competing for nutrients. They're all underground growers. And hyssop, it's going to release some allelopathic chemicals. So again, not a good companion. And brassicas and radishes have very similar pests. So if you've got one that has pests and you plant another nearby, it'll probably share them. So separate them if you want both. Strawberries, just a few left. Good, beans, borage, lettuce, onions, spinach, thyme, peas, squash, watermelon. Bad, again, the brassicas and the fennel. That poor fennel. Nobody wants to be near it. Um, but they have a very low growing habit. So if you have plants that grow above them, they're going to be shaded out. Strawberries really are kind of a spring plant, spring and early summer. They're usually done by June here. Some that say that they're indeterminate, meaning they're just going to produce all summer. Usually you don't get a heavy enough crop on those, and so you're competing with the birds. So if you're looking for a strawberry plant, look for one that's going to usually produce one big crop of fruit, and then it's done for the year. Sometimes some gardeners think strawberries enhance the taste of other crops. I don't know. I don't grow them. I just go to the U-Pick farm and I pick them there, or I let somebody else pick them for me, because I don't like to quarrel with the birds because they usually win. But you can try it. So if you've got leafy greens like spinach and lettuce and stuff like that, grow that nearby and see if that makes a difference in the flavor. Sunflowers, these again are a great trap for leaf-footed bugs, um, because they help pull the bugs away from the other good stuff, and you can pull them away like that it works like a companion plant in that regard. Um, you know, they apparently also have fairly deep roots, so if you have compact soil, you can grow some of these on there. It'll be easier for neighboring plants. Just as an aside, if you get the mammoth or the actual seed producing sunflowers, you get the added benefit of its bird food, which is very beneficial to the wild bird community. So I know I didn't really talk about that here, but this does produce a food source for wildlife. So you can always think about it from that aspect. And then, of course, they're tall, sturdy stems. You'll get things that'll grow up on the three sisters. It could be used here instead of corn. You can use that on sunflowers. And then you don't really need a trellis. And tomatoes, I think we're right almost to the end. They play well with just about everything. The bad, they don't get along so well with beans, beets, your brassicas. Some of these are also alternate season plants, potatoes, rosemary, walnuts. So they're very heavy feeders. They need a lot of nutrients. And that's because they're very heavy fruiters. So make sure that you're feeding them quite often and you're watering deeply. That way you won't get as many cracked fruits, cat facing, things like that. But eggplant, potatoes, tomatoes, they're all in the nightshade family and they are all susceptible to the same type of pests and diseases. So separate them. Pretend like they're bad kids at school. Separate them. You don't want them near each other. Corn is going to attract your tomato fruit worms or your corn earworms, and that can damage crops. So try to separate those. Your fennel and sunflowers and walnuts, again, allelopathic chemicals. So you don't want your growth inhibited because then you're not going to get your tomatoes. And walnuts, of course, the Julone. We're probably not going to plant them under a walnut tree. That's why. Zucchinis, again, they good players. This is a warm season type crop. Doesn't get along so well with potatoes, fennel, pumpkins. So potatoes and zucchini get similar diseases. Pumpkin vines can overwhelm zucchini plants. They're semi-vining plants, um, but pumpkins definitely have much bigger leaves and are much more vigorous growers. So they will overcome a zucchini plant if you can keep the vine borers off of them. Brassicas, there's some overlap there, but again, brassicas are usually just a fall winter type crop, whereas zucchinis are summer, spring, summer. And fennel, of course, still fennel. And then cucumbers, they're going to compete also for very similar nutrients and overcrowding. And there we go. So I was only 3 minutes over 7 o'clock. So let's see if there's what the wrong way. Trying to, okay, there's the chat box. All right, if you have any questions, go ahead and drop them in the chat box and I will get to them. So Danielle says borage flowers are edible and medicinal. Yes, they are. I have an herbs, medicinal herbs, and I think it'll talk a little bit about, I'm sure that's probably in there. So would you like to come say hi? No, I have a special guest here. She's going to come say hi. Come. I've already said something. Shirley. Hi. She helps me with a lot of my wonderful presentations. She does the front end work, and then I add a bunch of content and do the back end work on all of these. So we make for a good team. But this is also my mom. For you, those of you that did not know, she's a master gardener.
We look the same.
Yeah, we look a little bit the same. Okay. Anyway, it was my son's soccer awards tonight, and so I could not attend. I was here teaching, so she brought him back from that. All right, how close does companion need to be planted to be beneficial? Generally, if you look at the planting requirements for whatever it is that you're planting, if it says, space your plants 6 inches apart or something like that, think about the root system of the plant itself. If you've got enough room for the root system to spread out of that plant, and then you're going to put another one, that's probably close enough. You don't want to put them right adjacent to each other because then you're going to have competition. If you have something that's got kind of a volatile compound, something that's got the essential oil is doing some repelling or something like that, you know, that's debatable. I don't know. I would have to look further into that. Do you have to crush the leaves? Do you just, do you have to put it right up next to it? I don't know. But if you surround the plant, the good plants, and that you're trying to keep the bugs off of, then, maybe that has some, masking potential, but, that's a detail that I'm not 100% certain on. This presentation is more just to kind of give you an idea of what's got some research behind it, what could be possible, but is just, hearsay at this point. And, some things that you might do some further research in to see if you want to do it. What's a good companion plant for strawberries? I don't know what keeps birds away. Netting, that's what keeps birds away. Um, I didn't find anything specifically that was a benefit or anything that was going to take away from strawberries. You can grow them together with things, but their main predatory issue is birds. They're really not going to, I mean, I guess you could have slugs that could eat the strawberries, but I didn't come across anything specifically for a mollusk, which is basically a slug's just a snail without a shell. So that's interesting. That's a thought. I mean, some of these were very clear that they had an essential oil or a volatile compound that was doing some type of repelling, or the root system let off some type of compound that, when taken up by another plant, did some repelling. But I didn't see anything that was necessarily beneficial to having a strawberry plant nearby, except they have yummy fruit. So I'm not sure. Let's see, where are the bees? So that's what I was talking about with respect to a oasis in the middle of an island. So the bees are still there. In fact, I've got a couple bee houses out on my porch for the solitary bees, mason bees, leaf cutters, that kind of stuff. These are the solitary singular bees, not your honeybees. And so they're out there, but they're much, much smaller. They're very, very tiny. As we were walking in this afternoon, they were all over those bee houses. So they're out and they're breeding right now. When I was out at the Harvest Gwinnett egg extravaganza, the Saturday before last, we were out at E.E. Robinson Community Garden, which is off Peachtree Industrial. And outside where we were parking, outside the fence, there were a lot of bees that were just hovering over the ground. Those are solitary minor bees, and they were looking for love in their little bee houses that they dig down into the ground. So there are those bees, and I don't think a lot of people notice that they're there, but they are there. They're there. You're probably thinking about honeybees, or those are colony bees. Those are actually European or Italian honeybees that live in a hive. Most often now, it's going to be one maintained by a human. And you really have to have a beekeeper nearby in order to see them. You're not going to see a lot of wild hives out there, just simply because there are a lot of problems with keeping bees. First and foremost, you've got varroa mites, but you've got moths and other things that can just, hive beetles that can just decimate a hive. Bees are at a disadvantage now, mostly because of the varroa mite. It spreads a lot of viruses. So you really need intervention by a human in order to have a healthy beehive. And that's just how it is. So if you have a beekeeper nearby, then you probably have bees that are pollinating your flowers. If you don't have one, then you probably don't see a lot of honeybees, but you could have bees. I have contacts. If you're interested, let me know. I can hook you up. Hi, Shirley. I was one of your participants at Vines in years past. Um, does anybody have any other questions? If you want to get a copy of the slide deck, you can email me. I'm happy to share that. If you want to check out the other classes that'll be offered, I think they've got June up now, June, July. We've got through August. You can check out the events and classes QR code. And then if you want to go check out any of the recorded sessions and previous ones, you can go to the YouTube channel, the Metro Master Gardener, and you can find all of those. They all qualify for continuing education if you're a master gardener. So, you burned an hour here listening to me, and you can count that as continuing education. Also, again, another plug, I'll be doing, I put together an advanced training for master gardeners that's going to be available July 23rd. It's on rain gardens and stormwater and water quality management, looking at plants that we use for water quality management and rain gardens, wetlands, and that kind of thing. So kind of a different viewpoint than what a lot of folks have with their vegetable gardens and their ornamentals. So we'll be looking at what plants can do and how they can do a very good job for you at helping to clean up the environment. So be checking that out. That's on the Master Gardener main page if you're interested in that. So I think that's basically it. I don't see any more questions. So I'm going to stop sharing. And with that, I will let you go. So thanks for tuning in. I appreciate it. Have a good night.